by the adoption of technology and digitalization in the provision and delivery of banking services globally. And it is also important to say that this movement from traditional to conventional banking is increasing not only just in number, but also in terms of value. And I'll give you some. For instance, it is projected that digital banking users would exceed about 3.6 billion people by 2024. And by 2028, digital banking market would have increased or will surpass about $10.3 trillion. This expected phenomenal increase or the growth is largely driven by changing appetite for the adoption of new communication tools and product purchase platforms and delivery options. We've also seen preferences for shortest delivery time with no intermediaries, at least in terms of cost. And that takes me to the issue that was raised by the Director General of the ICAC when he talked about the fact that people are increasingly looking at cryptos and blockchain technologies because they're looking for processes that are costless and very seamless. Whereas to the regulator today, we see crypto, because of the risk of crypto, the risk that portends loss of value by the adopters of crypto, we take crypto with a lot of exceptions and the rest of them. But of course, what we've seen is that there's increasing movement away from reliance on intermediaries, like where you have the banks or you have a regulator watching over what they're doing to people wanting to deal with themselves directly, and also leads to the issue of lack of visibility and transparency in the kind of thing they do. But we've also seen adoption of one-stop shop transaction platforms as basis. Now, but really, to address the problem of the low penetration, what we'll try to do is that as regulators, we need to do everything possible to deepen our payment system infrastructure in our various jurisdictions. And in Nigeria, we have done a couple of things. We've been doing a couple of things indeed through our payment system infrastructure so as to improve the level of banking penetration in Nigeria. For instance, in 2002, we released guidelines on electronic banking in Nigeria. In 2004, we licensed and also supported the establishment of switching companies and interoperability of shared ATMs and POS in the banking sector. In 2006, we went into full implementation and live operation of the real-time gross settlement, the RTGS license in Nigeria. In Nigeria, before 2005, 2006, you find out that to clear checks at that time, it would take for checks within a locality about 7 days, and a check across states would take about 21 days. But because of the establishment of the real-time gross settlement system, it is now seamless. We don't even talk about days, we talk about hours for value to move. In 2007, the central bank, we also stipulated responsibility for e-payment development. In 2010, the central bank switching system went live. That's in Nigeria Interbank Settlement System. And after that, we immediately gave approval in principle for 16 mobile payment operators in Nigeria. These are all some of the steps that we were taking. In 2012, we licensed 15 commercial mobile license companies. We also launched our cashless policy in 2012. In 2014, we launched a bank verification number system so that each bank customer will have a specific identifier number with which, if you want to find out what the person is doing in the banking system. You can easily find, once you put the person's number, you can find what he's doing. But of course, in 2016, we also issued a revised guideline for electronic payment channels and transaction switching. And a couple of them happened between 2016 but in 2021, we also went straight into the issue of the launch of our digital currency, the CBDC, which we call the e-Naira, which is the first in Africa, the second in the world. Basically, all these are all attempts to make sure that we begin to move away from what we have today, moving away from a paper office to a paperless office, or paper transactions to paperless transaction, or from cash to cashless transactions, where people can adopt, people can see the ease in conducting banking services or financial services in a way that is seamless, in a way that is stress-free, in a way that they don't have to go into the brick and mortar building to be able to conduct financial services transactions, but they can stay in the comfort of either their homes and their offices to conduct these transactions. So that we see will be actions that will be taken, that have to be taken by regulators to improve, to solve the problem of the low penetration and get more and more people involved in the financial system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Governor. I think what you have said, I don't think anyone will dispute that, the digital banking, reaching, $10 trillion is a huge amount, and we cannot leave anybody behind. And I think what we've heard from the governor say in Nigeria about the importance of improving the payment infrastructure, cashless policy, the e-Naira, which I remember was, got a lot of publicity. And I think this is exciting. I think what we're hearing from our regulators is that they're playing a key role in supporting banking penetration and financial inclusion. And so on to our second question. I'll start with you, Jean-Claude. In terms of we can see digitalization and the disruption that's happening in the banking sector. And so clearly our banks and regulators need to come up with new strategies to succeed in the future. So from the perspective of BCAO, what strategies do you think banks and maybe regulators need to put in place to succeed in the future?
Oui, merci. Je pense que, comme ça a été indiqué, c'est un secteur qui évolue rapidement. La digitalisation, et parfois les régulateurs ont été mis devant situation où ils devaient rattraper un peu le processus. Je pense qu'il faut des stratégies qui intègrent pratiquement plusieurs acteurs pour que ça marche, et c'est un processus évidemment qui nécessite d'abord qu'il y ait des infrastructures pour pouvoir effectivement faciliter la digitalisation. C'est important, donc ça c'est plus le volet du secteur public. Les banques doivent s'adapter. Je pense qu'elles ont déjà commencé à s'adapter. Parce que ce que nous avons observé chez nous, dans le marché de la BCEAO, des partenariats qui ont été de nombreux partenariats, on a noté à peu près 25 partenariats entre des acteurs traditionnels que sont les banques, les établissements de crédit, et des nouveaux acteurs comme les fintech, les opérateurs mobiles, pour justement faire face à cette demande croissante donc pour des services financiers rapides, moins coûteux et ainsi de suite. Donc, nouveaux partenariats, les banques qui se sont adaptées, les banques elles-mêmes se sont fortement engagées dans la digitalisation, dans le processus de digitalisation. Et donc, on voit un changement structurel qui se fait. Les régulateurs également ne doivent pas être en reste. Je crois qu'ils ne sont pas en reste. Pratiquement toutes les banques centrales aujourd'hui revoient leur régulation. Au niveau de la BCEAO, nous sommes nous-mêmes à l'instar de ce qui se fait dans beaucoup d'autres banques centrales. Nous réfléchissons sur la mise en place de monnaie digitale de banque centrale. Nous sommes assez avancés dans le processus et donc c'est une adaptation constante de la réglementation et nous allons même plus loin en intégrant, nous sommes en train de réfléchir pour intégrer de nouvelles dimensions qui sont des aspects qui vont de plus en plus être présents. Les questions liées à, on a parlé de la blockchain, on a entendu il y a quelques instants, les questions de big data, les questions de open banking, nécessitent à travers le partage d'informations, mais évidemment avec tous les garde-fous que ça nécessite, notamment les données parfois personnelles. Donc tous ces aspects-là, évidemment, doivent être pris en compte parce que ça va faire partie de l'environnement de la banque de demain, du secteur financier de demain. Et bien entendu, et ça c'est une préoccupation principale des régulateurs, parce que c'est leur responsabilité première en tant que banque centrale, s'assurer de la stabilité financière dans le système, s'assurer que le processus n'entraîne pas et ne favorise pas des activités illicites, donc des dispositifs qui soient non seulement performants, mais qui soient efficaces. Et, très important, c'est la protection des utilisateurs, des consommateurs. On l'a vu, effectivement, dans certains cas, où ce sont parler un peu des cryptocurrencies, cryptoactifs plutôt, dans l'exemple qui a été donné, où il y a vraiment des utilisateurs qui ont été nécessairement flous. Et donc, je crois que ce sont les 4 principes qui sous-tendent l'action des banques centrales, mais tous les dispositifs donc, doivent être mis en place. Tous les acteurs ont un rôle à jouer si on veut aller de l'avant dans les meilleures conditions. Il y a la formation. Je crois que c'est un élément également sur lequel il faut insister, parce qu'on est, comme on dit, à la frontière, il y a de nouveaux développements, et donc tous les acteurs doivent participer. Au niveau de la Banque centrale, notre centre de formation a engagé des processus de formation avec tous les acteurs. Nous travaillons dans la formation, nous aidons les trésors publics, donc tous les processus de digitalisation au niveau des États. Nous travaillons avec le secteur bancaire, le secteur décentralisé également, dans le processus de formation de leurs agents, dans tout ce qui est action concernant la digitalisation et tous les dispositifs à prendre. Et bien sûr, nous formons également nos agents à ces nouveaux métiers. Et donc, je crois que le secteur public, les États, les banques, les nouveaux acteurs qui intègrent le secteur financier, l'écosystème, parce que c'est de ça qu'il s'agit, les régulateurs, sommes tous dans une dynamique où nous devons nous adapter à la demande des clients, qui est service de qualité au moindre coût et de manière rapide. La banque de demain, c'est ça, c'est-à-dire qu'en fait, toutes les transactions vont se faire pratiquement sans avoir besoin de se déplacer. Et donc, le processus est déjà engagé, on le voit, mais c'est irréversible. Donc, il faut donc s'y lancer, mais en prenant en compte tous les aspects que j'ai évoqués, à travers une régulation qui soit adaptée et une régulation qui s'adapte aux besoins sans être excessive, mais en étant absolument conforme à ce qui est recherché. Merci.
Thank you very much, Governor. And I think I heard you say the importance of partnerships and how banks are partnering with new players. We heard you talk about the value of integration and also financial stability, which needs to be sacrosanct. And I think we also heard you talk about we need to ensure that ecosystems allow for protection of depositors and consumers, which after all is one of the key things that our regulators are supposed to be doing. Governor Godwin, in Nigeria, of course, has very, very large banks. You know, some of them are in different parts of Africa, some of them are in the UK, and so on. From your perspective, what strategies do banks and maybe regulators need to adopt to succeed in the future?
Well, thank you very much. I think basically is the fact that the regulator needs to increasingly become more agile to to be able to really be, try and at least move at par, if not ahead, of the regulated entities that we find. What we find, I will say in the past, I don't want to say even up to this time, that you will find the regulators moving behind the regulated entities and also the other actors in the system. The regulators need to be a little bit more agile. They need to have, need to be able to have in place capable people who really understand where the future is going, so that they can use that opportunity as a way to really drive regulation that will control some of the risks that we see emerging as a result of this, what I can call phenomenal increase and the way people are going about, or people want to conduct financial or banking services. Agility is very important. Based on that, set up regulations, monitor them. You are very correct. For instance, that Nigeria has banks that are not just in Nigeria, they're in different parts, different countries in Africa. And what we're trying to do, make sure that the College of Banking Supervisors are really, really alive to their responsibility. They hold the College of Banking Supervisors to make sure that as we move, not just in Nigeria, move out of Nigeria to other countries, that we also work and understand the regulation in their country and see how to ensure that in the provision of banking or financial services, we're able to insulate the customers and make sure that they don't lose their money. Like I said, know that there are risks. The important thing is that we must ensure that we identify the risks, measure them, and then think of the best ways to mitigate them to ensure that people who have entrusted their funds in your custody of a bank do not increasingly face the risk of losing their deposits in those banks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Governor. And I think what you say is absolutely true about the need for agility. And I think for the regulator to be ahead, I think some of us were caught by surprise by the whole M-Pesa and digital banking sector. So now we need to be ahead. And we know that the importance of Pan-African banking and continental banking is key. Our friends here in Mauritius, I know, are also strategically looking to move outside of the continent. And I think it's good to see that some of our more established and deeper markets are thinking about doing this in a broader way as a strategy. Mr. 𝗶𝗴𝗶𝗶, if I could turn to you as well, in terms, we know that Morocco also has some of the largest banks, not just in the continent, but also in North Africa. And we have seen Morocco banks coming down into the rest of the continent. Any views about what strategies need to be adopted, even by the regulators, to succeed in the future?
Merci. Merci pour cette question. Donc, je pense que je suis tout à fait d'accord avec le gouverneur de la BCEAO sur la question du partenariat. Je pense que la personne n'a intérêt à ce que la rage de guerre soit déterrée entre les fintech, big tech et les banques. Donc, le régulateur serait plus à l'aise lorsqu'il y a des partenaires constructifs. Et pour qu'il y ait des partenaires constructifs, il faut traiter les problèmes, bien sûr, des fintech, les difficultés auxquelles sont confrontés les fintech, et regarder aussi du côté stratégie des banques. Et donc, quand on voit les difficultés des fintech, il s'agit souvent, je parle là aussi d'une étude qui a été faite récemment au Maroc, donc, qui montre que le problème, c'est d'abord un problème de talent, de formation certifiée, de disponibilité des données sur les consommateurs, la clientèle des banques, question de financement. Donc, donc, il faut traiter ces questions, et ce n'est pas uniquement l'affaire du régulateur, c'est aussi l'affaire du gouvernement. Alors, côté banque, il faut qu'elle s'adapte effectivement, et donc elles sont en train de le faire. Et donc, pour digitaliser un petit peu les services financiers. Et je pense qu'aujourd'hui, les banques sont conscientes que les fintechs peuvent faire mieux sur certaines parties de la chaîne de valeur des services financiers, peut faire mieux que les banques. Et donc, parce qu'ils ont des marges, des coûts plus réduits, parce qu'ils ont des plateformes, des applications mobiles, ils recourent de manière plus agile au cloud, alors que les banques sont très réticentes par rapport au cloud. Et donc, quand on voit le Maroc, il y a une dynamique qui est là. Les banques sont en train de réduire le réseau bancaire aujourd'hui, après une accélération au cours de la dernière décennie du réseau bancaire. Aujourd'hui, il y a une décrue du réseau bancaire, et donc il y a une optimisation de ce côté-là. Et donc aujourd'hui, l'enquête la plus récente qu'on a faite auprès des banques, il a révélé que 45%, presque 50% des transactions bancaires sont digitalisées. Bon, c'est pas mal pour un système bancaire très concentré où la concurrence n'est pas très importante. Donc je pense qu'il y a ce côté bon. Mais le régulateur, il a un rôle fondamental dans le cadre de ce partenariat et pour développer les fintech, comme ça a été dit par mes collègues. Et donc, la Banque centrale, déjà, elle a mis en place une politique d'accompagnement des fintech, donc surtout pour les accompagner avant de déposer leur agrément, leur autorisation, le cas échéant. Et le régulateur intervient aussi pour mettre tout le cadre réglementaire qu'il faut en matière de sécurité, cybersécurité, donc pour la protection des données personnelles. Mais là aussi, le gouvernement il a un rôle important à jouer pour mettre en place tout ce qui est donc de compléter un petit peu l'infrastructure numérique qui est suffisamment bien développée au Maroc, et on vient de la renforcer par la signature électronique et par le système de tiers confiance. Voilà. Donc, je pense que l'avenir du système bancaire dépend du partenariat que seront noués et qui sont en train de se faire aussi. On le voit aussi au Maroc, il y a pas mal de partenariats qui se font entre les banques et les fintech. Merci.
Thank you very much. And I think I heard you say two things. One is the necessity of training, and that clearly everyone needs to be trained, starting by regulators training the market, but also the value of penetration, which is increasing, and therefore that as the regulators need to be at the forefront of ensuring that this penetration is done in a regulatory way. Let me ask my final question to my panelists, and I'll start with you, Governor Emefiele of Nigeria. This is, if I was to give each one of you a crystal ball and say 10 years from now, what will the regulator of the future in 10 years like? What will that regulator look like? What will they be doing?
Well, given what we're seeing today about changing preferences, changing appetite on the part of consumers of banking services, the regulator of the future, next 10 years, I repeat, must remain very, very agile, must be able to live up to the responsibility to make sure that whatever is done, it must do everything possible to protect those consumers, because risks continue to emerge in the course of people trying to provide services to meet the needs of consumers. We all, as regulators, have been seeing what has been happening today in the crypto industry. What is the crypto? Those who are running the crypto businesses, usually they don't want a traditional regulator to come in between. And there's a lot of problems on visibility about the transaction. And when they say a transaction is encrypted, it means that there are certain things that are hidden. And we're seeing increasingly that people, in an attempt to want a seamless way of conducting banking or financial transaction services, they want to go with the kind of people who offer crypto services. But we've seen how people have lost money, how values have disappeared in the crypto business, and you'll find that the regulators are very, very unanimous in making sure that we do not give them the kind of recognition that we have. But as time goes on, we would have, as regulators, begin to think about, if this is where the changing preferences are going, then what kind of regulation are we going to put in place to ensure that the risk of loss that we currently see in the crypto industry, where people invest as a result of trust because they want easy means of conducting banking or financial service transactions. They want to do it, but what do we do as regulators to make sure that we work together to ensure that those who are consuming these services, say in crypto, do not lose the money at the rate that they are losing their monies today? The risks are there. How do we help them to mitigate the risk and ensure that everybody is brought under one umbrella to be sure that people do not lose their monies? I think that would be my suggestion.
Of agility. Governor 𝗶𝗴𝗶𝗶, in 10 years' time, regulator of tomorrow. What will the regulator be doing in 10 years' time?
Difficile de répondre à cette question. Je sais que les régulateurs sont conservateurs, sont très prudents, prennent pas beaucoup de risques, et je ne m'attends pas à ce qu'il y ait un bouleversement de la manière de réguler le secteur bancaire. Mais il faut être attentif aux études qui sont faites par les régulateurs au plan international. Je vise par là le Conseil de stabilité financière, le comité de Bâle. Et donc, les scénarios qu'ils envisagent, c'est que le morcellement du paysage bancaire est un scénario plausible. Donc, parce que les big tech sont en train de changer un petit peu le paysage de la banque conventionnelle. Mais les scénarios prédisent aussi que le concept de la meilleure banque est possible. Ça veut dire que les banques actuelles, qui sont bien établies, qui ont pu adopter des innovations financières rapidement, peuvent bien sûr résister donc à cette vague des fintech et big tech. Et donc oui, donc le régulateur devrait, dans sa stratégie de régulation, intégrer tout ça. Et quand on parle de ça, bien sûr, ça nous renvoie à la question des compétences. Donc, problème, je pense, numéro 1 auquel les régulateurs vont face demain, et déjà c'est le cas aujourd'hui. Donc, c'est que les compétences manquent parce que les fintech, big tech, ils ont besoin de talent, les banques, ils ont besoin de talent, et les banques centrales encore plus. Mais quand on voit nos pays, en particulier le Maroc, on voit que les talents partent ailleurs. Donc, partent au Canada, en France et ailleurs, des centaines et des centaines d'ingénieurs informatiques quittent le Maroc pour améliorer leur situation financière ailleurs. Donc, moi, je pense que notre principal défi demain, c'est les compétences.
Thank you very much. And I think we have to be cautious, we need to be innovative, and we need to develop our skills. Last but not least, Governor Jean-Claude, in 10 years' time, what does the regulator look like?
Merci. Je pense qu'évidemment, il est toujours difficile de lire dans une boule de cristal, dans 10 ans, qu'est-ce qui va se passer. Mais en partant de la situation d'aujourd'hui, les évolutions que l'on observe, on peut se projeter, en tout cas essayer de se projeter en disant que le secteur bancaire va être encore plus virtuel que nous avons aujourd'hui. Les éléments que nous voyons, j'ai évoqué ça un peu, tout ce qui est big data, intelligence artificielle, blockchain, open banking, qui sont déjà là pratiquement, vont certainement prendre beaucoup plus d'ampleur. Et Mais la régulation va toujours être là. Elle doit être, bien sûr, comme l'a dit le gouverneur de la Banque centrale du Nigeria, nous devons être beaucoup plus agiles, beaucoup plus en position d'anticiper, mais toujours avoir à l'esprit qu'il faut, quelles que soient ces évolutions, que nous arrivions à assurer la stabilité financière. Parce que s'il n'y a pas de stabilité financière, on ne peut pas avoir de financement de l'économie. Et s'il n'y a pas de financement de l'économie, il n'y a pas de croissance. Et donc, tout le système, évidemment, est en difficulté. Donc, la stabilité financière, la lutte contre le blanchiment, toutes les activités illicites, parce qu'on a vu une agilité, une intelligence accrue des trafiquants pour justement passer à travers tous ces différents mécanismes pour éviter donc d'être pris, et bien sûr la protection des consommateurs, la protection des utilisateurs, parce que quand ils sont évidemment affectés négativement, c'est toute la confiance dans le système qui est mise en cause, et sans confiance, il n'y a pas de système financier. Donc je crois que ça va rester des priorités, et ce qu'il va également, on peut anticiper, il sera de plus en plus important qu'il y ait une collaboration beaucoup plus forte entre les différents régulateurs de différentes juridictions, parce que avec ces évolutions, on voit que les utilisateurs passent d'une juridiction à une autre de manière beaucoup plus facile. On n'a pas besoin de signer des conventions et ainsi de suite. Ça passe à travers la digitalisation d'une juridiction à une autre. Donc, plus grande concertation, plus grande coopération, plus grande collaboration entre les différents régulateurs. Je crois que ce sont des éléments, à mon avis, qui sont incontournables dans le futur. Donc voilà un peu ce que je souhaitais indiquer, sans oublier que pour nous, pays en voie de développement, Banque centrale du pays en voie de développement, les questions d'inclusion financière, les questions d'inclusion des zones défavorisées, des zones rurales, l'inclusion des femmes en particulier, tout ça reste des problématiques qui sont primordiales. Il va falloir continuer à encourager, à développer, parce que ça fait partie de notre réalité. Et donc, modernisation, accélération donc, de la digitalisation, de la virtualisation, mais les 4 principes que j'ai évoqués sont extrêmement fondamentaux dans un contexte où nous avons des réalités que nous devons prendre en compte pour justement assurer notre croissance, la croissance dans notre région. Merci.
Thank you very much. We heard you say the world will be more virtual. We need to collaborate and above all ensure stability. Thank you very much. A warm round of applause for our governors and for our panel. Thank you very much. Do we have time for 1 or 2 questions? Maybe just 1 or 2 questions?
Yeah, I think we can have 1 or 2 questions. Okay. Quick, short questions, please.
Yes.
Hi, good day, everyone. Thank you for this very elaborate panel. I'm 𝗂𝗏𝗏𝗶𝗵𝗏. Since the governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria mentioned the intervention of Mr. 𝗖𝗶𝗏𝗏, and also along the line of the governor of the Bank of Central des États de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, that we have to be adapting. I wish to make a complementary line of thought with regards to the intervention made by Mr. 𝗂𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏. Now, what we have to bear in mind is that AML risks did not come about in 2009 with the first Bitcoin that was mined. It has always been around. However, now, there are tools, such as those provided by companies like Chainalysis, Elliptic being the 2 most prominent ones, that can allow you to trace a virtual asset in 18 minutes, up to the time where it was mined, minted, or to the Genesis block. And this cannot be done with fiat currencies. So what my point is that today we have genuine exchanges, the like of, to name a few, BitGo, Binance, or closer to us, Yellow Card, which has been recently licensed in Botswana, Yellow Card being the biggest exchange in Africa. These genuine exchanges, we find and we see that they find it is a very lucrative business and they want to be regulated. Since the advent of the 𝗂𝗏𝗏 Act in Mauritius, we have had a number of those exchanges who want to be regulated. And if you look at their AML-CFT framework, safeguards, it is extremely, extremely stringent. And the advantage of that, my point is that what we central banks have to be very minded about is the phenomenon of de-risking. And I think about 2 months ago, the Reserve Bank of South Africa issued a communiqué to the banks under its regulations against de-risking. Because what de-risking will do, de-risking, debanking, it's also called debanking. So what that does is that
maybe do you have an actual question? We're running out of time. So
yeah. So just to conclude is that I think it's a time where the central banks and those exchanges who are genuine have to work hand in hand to come up with the appropriate legal framework, like Mauritius has done, for example. Since we enacted the law in February, we already have 8 regulations that came about in about 6 months' time. So that would be my humble recommendations to the central banks. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. So really, you're saying that the virtual players want to be regulated, they need to be regulated,
yes.
Right? Got it. Thank you very much.
First of all, Mathieu Mandeng, CEO of Standard Chartered Bank Mauritius, Chairman of the Board Standard Chartered Côte d'Ivoire. Well, first of all, thank you very much for your submission, governors. I have a more general question, very briefly. What we're seeing in the continent is global banks de-risking the continent by exiting. In the context where we should be having a combination of indigenous, regional, and global players, we're seeing global players going out of the continent. My question to governors is, what can we do, what can they do at their level to sort of, retain existing global banks and attract other global banks in the continent, in the context where, obviously, we talk about resetting globalization?
Thank you very much. Does anybody want to answer that about the globalization and how can we bring some of the global banks into a region? We've seen because of the impacts of trade, some of the global banks have actually left Africa, right? So what do we need to do to enhance that, global banks back onto the continent? Does anybody in the panel wish to address that? Bringing global banks into the continent, into Africa.
Well, we've seen that increasingly the world, rather than going in more into or deepening the practices in globalization, we've seen that de-globalization is really increasingly becoming the order of the day. And what does that mean? That people, when they see that there is a global risk or a tendency for some challenges globally, people begin to think about themselves alone. But that is the reason, for instance, today we've seen the US this year alone raise rates by almost 400 basis points. I think almost about 3.75 basis points. And it is very clear that they will continue to raise rates as long as they are seeing inflationary pressures in their jurisdiction. And as a result of the decision to raise rates in 1 year by almost 400 basis points, it has created very serious risks in the global financial market. It has resulted in immense depreciation the currencies of other countries, whereas the US dollar continues to strengthen. We've been at different sessions where we had asked Jerome Powell questions, like for instance, African Central Bank governors at the Bank of BIS meeting in June. We had calls to ask him, listen, we need you to be circumspect about the way you take decisions, because you should know that whatever decisions you take will eventually have transmission mechanisms on emerging market and developing economies. But of course, that advice has not been heeded. What am I saying? So when you begin to say that global banks are moving away, and that we need to begin to think about what can we do to attract them to come back in the region. I would say that some of us are not in support of that, given that everybody is thinking about themselves. I think what we need to begin to think about in our region is how do we really work together as Africans or as people who belong to one regional bloc, work together to see to how we grow banking and financial services through institutions that will really provide banking and financial transactions in our region, across borders within our areas, so as to be able to protect our own region and grow our economy in our region. That should be what we should be thinking about. We should be, for instance, you in Mauritius should be free to allow banks from Nigeria or from the DCO region or from the South African region to come into your area. Whereas Nigeria should also open up its own doors to allow your banks come in, so that we work together as a community. Today, our governments are thinking about how do we integrate the economic and financial system in the continent. I think we should be thinking more and more towards how to help ourselves and not how to begin to attract more of these global banks, where when there are risks, when there are problems, all they will do, they will either not only go away, but even credits or support that you normally get from them will dry up, like we have seen today. That would be my view.
Charity starts at home. We can start by supporting ourselves. There's over 1 billion people in the continent of Africa. If we use digitalization and the banks in our continents, we can truly grow our economy just amongst ourselves. Once again, warm thanks to our panelists. Please, thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, we have come to the end of this panel discussion. So, of course, a big round of applause to our panelists, to our moderators, to those who asked questions, and those who shared their views. Thank you very much. Please be seated again. We shall now proceed to the next item on the agenda, which will be the closing remarks. And I have the honor and pleasure to call on stage the Governor of the Bank of Mauritius, Mr. 𝗂𝗶𝗴𝗶 𝗔𝗌, for his speech, with a big round of applause, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Roshan. Ministers who are with us, my dear colleagues, governors of central banks who have been able to make it to this very interesting forum that we've had since yesterday. A very good morning. I'm looking at my watch. A very good morning to you all. I'm certainly very pleased to be here with you today to close the series of discussions that we've been having over the last 2 days. One thing that comes out very clearly is our common objective and the potential that we know we have across the continent through the use of digital. And this objective, I think, has been already spelled out at various levels individually when we look at our own individual countries, when we look at our own individual institutions. It's very clear that we all have a very clear and very sort of like well-defined digital agenda that we're all following. I think what we need to do now as policymakers, and very importantly as central banks, is to ensure that we can deliver on these objectives, and very importantly, try and work closely together so that we can achieve the common good of our continent. But certainly, in so doing, we have a number of challenges to address. We've had beautiful panels since yesterday. We've heard the opportunities, but also the hurdles that will come our way while trying to achieve this digital objective, and very importantly, the role that banks will have to play as key enablers in this process. One cannot achieve the state of a full digital economy if the banks do not walk the talk also. And this is where policymakers, governments, but very importantly, central banks will have to ensure that we create the right enabling environment and the enabling frameworks to allow this to happen. When I look at some of the challenges, you can try and summarize them in 4 or 5 key categories. The first remain infrastructural level challenges, which policymakers and governments will have to address, both in terms of physical infrastructure, in terms of energy, and in terms of communication. We then have a big challenge that is of AML-CFT. We've heard the Director General of the ICAC earlier today. I myself had the opportunity of leading the Mauritius delegation through our process of the FATF listing and ensuring that Mauritius gets out and exits that list in a time which has surprised many, I must say, in a good manner. But today we stand at a point that we are continuously investing ourselves in ensuring that we do have the most appropriate frameworks in place to accompany our institutions in this process of AML-CFT. And we should not make the mistake of just trying to implement something and forget about it. The key to success in this process is all about sustainability of our actions, sustainability and effectiveness of all the initiatives and actions that we are rolling out. And we need to ensure that whatever we do today are things that would remain in time also, and we continue to invest ourselves in this. So AML-CFT is something that will be keeping especially regulators and central banks very much awake over the next few years. And very importantly, by that inference, if we remain awake, our regulators will be even more awake, as they will have to make sure that they understand in what direction we're going also. Fiscal. We heard a lot about the 2-pillar solution yesterday. This is something that is of extreme and critical importance to all countries in Africa. In Mauritius, more so, given the fact that we are an international financial center, it is even of much more relevance to us. I will certainly not repeat what has been discussed yesterday, but I think we have a clear commitment for the good of the continent again to ensure that we are all adhering and aligning ourselves to what the standard-setting bodies are actually putting in place. And then, very importantly, in this process, as I said, banks will have a key role to play. And for them to be able to deliver on their expectations, central banks will have to define very clearly the parameters and the way in which we are seeing them delivering as key enablers in this process of digitalization. When we talk about digitalization, there are a few areas and elements that we need to ensure that we are getting it right and not wrong. Because to me, these are key fundamentals. If we get these wrong, we're actually putting at stake the entire country, the financial stability, the financial system, and also the entire continent. In this regard, at the level of the Bank of Mauritius, I've been engaging very closely with many stakeholders over the last 2 years in ensuring that we define a very clear-cut strategy when it comes to the digital roadmap that we are putting in place. Very recently, this has also been spelled out in a clear-cut roadmap known as the Future of Banking that was launched a couple of weeks ago in connection with the celebration of the Emerald Jubilee of the Bank of Mauritius. I will certainly not dwell in all aspects of that, but it's important to note that there are those key strategic areas where we need to focus on going forward. First and foremost, the use, but very much the risk associated with cyber. Our countries, our regions, our institutions are all vulnerable to cyber attacks. As we increase the use of digital, especially digital payments and digital banking, it is no doubt that fraudsters will try and get into our systems. And this is where we have to continuously ensure that we do have the most appropriate frameworks to accompany and to safeguard our financial systems. In this regard, basically, at the level of the Bank of Mauritius, we have, since a few weeks, already launched for consultation a guideline, a dedicated guideline on the use of cyber and technology risk management. I would here try and encourage all other central banks in the region also to clearly spell out the clear risk and how we need to tackle cyber and technology risk. At the same time, we see increasing use of cloud services. Earlier this year, it was actually in September, we, at the level of the Bank of Mauritius, we have already introduced our guideline on the use of cloud services. And I must say, I'm noting with great satisfaction now the increasing interest of our commercial banks here in the island in terms of moving and using cloud services. At the same time, you cannot have a dream or an objective to be a digital economy where you have digital banks operating without clearly spelled out frameworks for them. So in December last year, I introduced a dedicated license for allowing digital banks to operate from the country. But very importantly, what we are doing now is also spelling out digital onboarding, because institutions can only thrive in this environment if they are given the right enabling framework to be able to onboard clients digitally also. At this point, as we speak, a couple of the regulators of the Bank of Mauritius have already started this process of digital onboarding. Many others are looking forward to start this process also. And I'm very much determined to make things much more clearer for everyone as we go along. But we are very much encouraging digital onboarding at our level. Certainly, there are a number of risk areas, again, associated with this, CDD being one, the KYC elements being one. And to this end, we are going to introduce, by the end of this year, our centralized KYC platform, a project that the Bank of Mauritius has been focusing on over the last, I would say, year and a half now, and we have made significant strides in moving on in that front. So this would be a platform that would allow banks and non-banking financial institutions in the country to be able to conduct due diligence and KYC on operators. This being said, we have another major potential and challenge also in front of us, and that is to do with the use of virtual assets. A lot has been said over the last few years about, although I don't like the term cryptocurrencies, but crypto assets. I like to refer to them as being assets. They're by no means and by no definition any currency, but they can only be classified as assets. And this is a position that we have adopted also here in Mauritius. We've been very clear The Bank of Mauritius, as well as there's a sister regulatory institution known as the Financial Services Commission. So we have adopted clear strategies in terms of recognizing cryptos as being only asset class instruments. Sophisticated investors can invest in them while certainly taking into try and adopt a position which is very clear and spells out our position on all that is virtual assets. To this end, I'm pleased to inform you that later on this week, we shall be issuing a consultation paper on virtual assets, where we are already giving initial thoughts and would be encouraging all stakeholders to give us their views also on that topic, so that before the end of this year, we can clarify and implement that position formally. And again, in this process, I think what is also very important is to ensure that we keep the fine line of balance between what the banks need and what central banks are also looking at, and very importantly, what expectations customers may be having. But one thing is clear, there is no second thought when it comes to AML risk associated with virtual assets. We will be very strict in defining our position to that end. Now, for us to be able to deliver on all of this, I think there are other challenges also that we should not forget about. When you talk about virtual assets, it also brings in quite a lot of risk with respect to financial stability and the very existence and use of money as such. And this is what I think has explained why many central banks around the world had started thinking about the introduction of CBDCs. Governor of Central Bank of Nigeria has already been one of the first one to move in that direction. In Mauritius, we are currently finalizing the parameters of a pilot under which we shall be launching, as I said, on a pilot basis, the use of a digital rupee, our own CBDC. But elements that we should not ignore in this process would have to be those that are attributable to financial stability risk, and very importantly to monetary policy risk also. Whether CBDCs would be interest-bearing or not is a fundamental question that many central banks around the world have taken different positions on. And if we want it to be a success, I think we would need a greater level alignment at an international level. But to start off, I think very importantly, we will need to consult, we would need to collaborate more amongst central banks in the region, for the region, so that we can move in the right direction. And I would here urge governors of central banks who are present with us here today, and also those who could not make it physically to be with us here today, to give importance to expertise sharing, knowledge sharing, and more collaboration among ourselves, so that we can learn from each other in this process which we are all going through. Before I conclude, I must also say that in such challenging times, and having in front of us, topical issues, we need to demonstrate much more agility. A term, a word that many central bank governors have just used, much more agility, much more capability to deliver and to understand everything that is in front of us, be it in terms of the use of artificial intelligence, be it in terms of the use of better data management, data collection, be it in terms of the use of AML, CFT, and everything that is linked with what I've just mentioned here. I think we will need to demonstrate that level of agility and flexibility very, very clearly, so that we can collaborate more and certainly reach and achieve the objectives and the potential that we are describing for ourselves. I think Africa, as our continent, cannot escape this trend. In fact, the digital shift that we are all witnessing in our banking landscape is now becoming a sine qua non for banks' survival. And it is only if we work together and very much hand in hand that we can reach all these potential and objectives. And I think, again, we need to go beyond our own boundaries when we're thinking about the solutions that we are trying to implement. Well, with these words, I must certainly thank each and every one of you who have been with us since yesterday, ministers, governors, deputy governors, key stakeholders for the active participation that we've been seeing over the last 2 days. I certainly look forward to continuing such interactions and for the good of our own institutions, our own countries, and our own continent. I now have the pleasure, certainly, to declare this conference closed. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Governor 𝗏𝗡, for your closing remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, we have now come to the end of this international conference on digital economy and digital banking. I hope you have enjoyed it as much as I have. And of course, it would not have been possible to have such a wonderful event without the contribution of organizations and persons who have contributed directly or indirectly to the success of this conference, especially the Bank of Mauritius and the EDB for hosting this event. I also thank this wonderful audience for being so lovely. I now invite all of you for lunch and refreshments, which will be served at the same place as yesterday. If you need any help, the information desk is still there to help you. As for me, I wish you a wonderful afternoon and do make the most of the remaining of your stay. Goodbye, bon appétit.